Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Media Connect. I am your Grandmaster Flash of Ceremonies, Evan Shapiro, your media cartographer. Before we get into this great panel, Cutting Streaming Delivery Costs with AI, a little housekeeping. First of all, I want to thank Vecima Networks for sponsoring this panel. Couldn't have done it without you guys. Second of all, for those of you who were here during the pre-show, you were listening to some great music. The first person who can accurately name the person playing that music or the musician or band playing that music and the song and who is here at the end of this panel will win a $50 gift card from Amazon courtesy of Streaming Media Connect. Now, you have to get both the song and the act right, and you have to be here at the end. Lastly, next, you can get closed captions for this session just by clicking the closed caption button on your Zoom. If you need any help with that, just ask that in the chat. And then also look at the chat for links for the bios of our panelists and our moderator. Also for a link to the YouTube channel, where you'll be able to find all the content from Streaming Media Connect this week, next week on our YouTube channel. So Steve Nathan-Kelly will put the links for our bios in there, and for the Streaming Media Connect YouTube channel in there as well. Also, the chat is where you're going to find some information, but the Q&A is where you put your Qs and we will put our As. So if you want to ask a question of any of the panelists or the moderator, please put the questions in the Q&A, not in the chat. Lastly, before we get to this panel, this is our 14th Streaming Media Connect. Our 15th Streaming Media Connect will be February 25th through the 27th. 2025. Yes, next year is 2000. We are halfway through this decade almost. So without further ado, let me bring our panel, Cutting Streaming Delivery Costs with AI, to the stage, and our wonderful moderator, Nadine Krefetz from Reality Software. Nadine, take it away.
Thank you very much. And why don't we have everyone else join us? So Andy, Ethan, Maria, and absolutely Paul, you got there first. Excellent. Cool. So I think this is a really interesting topic. It's both a very complicated topic and a very simple topic. So we're going to cover both ends of this, but I wanted to really start off, and this is with Andy and Ethan, and ask about what are some of the questions you get from customers or clients about this topic? Like, what do they come up and ask you? Either one of you can start first.
I'll jump in. I feel like the number one thing that I get asked is, what are you doing with my data? That is any AI conversation becomes, what are you doing with my data, and are you stealing my data? Is
even on the encoding side?
Even in the encoding side, and you know, it's a valid question to a certain degree when you're talking about you know, like training for sports action or other elements. There's going to be questions about it, but that is always categorically one of the first questions that I get asked along the way. Ethan, what about you?
So for us,
so you don't get that same question. Well, maybe you do.
Within our clients, we kind of get asked about sort of dipping our toe in or expanding what our clients are already doing in AI. It sort of falls into three broad buckets around consumption, monetization, and the tech side, the encoding tech side that we'll talk about today. A lot of times it's where do we start? And other times it's kind of how do we progress this along? And it always comes back to an ROI type question. And hey, can we afford to do this? And will it make sense for us to do it? And then once we get past that, we kind of get into the data pieces that Andy mentioned. What's really encouraging about this, though, is a lot of our clients are starting to bring in people who know this AI space, chief AI officers, et cetera. So you really can start to have that next level conversation with these clients about what we can do, what's the art of the possible, and where do we see this going in the next 5-10 years.
Okay. Now, again, is this a specific encoding related question, or is it more kind of general?
They fall into those three buckets, but the encoding pieces are certainly part of it because as you sort of look at the consolidation in the marketplace, there's a lot of overlapping functionality within these companies, and really kind of getting to one base functionality that will drive those tech decisions is where a lot of our clients are looking to get to.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm curious as to, and why I keep obviously plugging into encoding, is because that's what we're talking about. And something that I think is a very kind of specific group of people who usually tend to focus on the encoding. We are already getting questions in the Q&A. I promise some of these questions are actually within what we've already planned out. So let me hold off on that for a second. Paul, now I really kind of wanted to get a sense of where you sit with this and what your company is doing in terms of AI encoding and overall video management, video quality service, et cetera.
For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, so our belief is that, everybody is looking to cut costs, right? But our belief is that cost improvements should not come at the expense of video quality. And why? Because I believe that video quality is kind of one of these, no matter how you measure it, it's a magic metric, right? And what I mean by that is good VQ is a primary driver of customer satisfaction. At the same time, bad VQ is a primary driver of customer dissatisfaction. So in theory, every dollar that you throw at video quality should throw $2 back at you. The problem is that it's almost impossible to measure that ROI because you're looking at things like customer churn and engagement. It's not something that you can really isolate, right? But what if you could improve quality in a way that also reduces your platform costs? And so what we've done, the specific use case that we've implemented, is we use generative AI to take a source video file, significantly improve that source, get rid of artifacts that came in through the initial encode, effectively turn it back into mezzanine quality or better, so that the transcode has to work a lot less. You can be a lot more aggressive. So you effectively, and there are different levers you can pull, you effectively double your video quality while cutting the size of the video in half. And so from a cost perspective, you can imagine all the downstream benefits that has with respect to deferring capital and OpEx investments in CDN, storage, et cetera. And we do it in a way that is agnostic to the balance of the platform.
Okay. So, it's funny because my internet service seems to be not working as fast as it should be. But so I'll ask this quickly. Maria, do you want to add something?
Yeah. So I agree with Paul on what he said. I was a board advisor for a company called iSize, which was sold to Sony Interactive Entertainment. And they did something similar. They were using machine learning to do a pre-coding step. So before the encoding, so like what Paul's talking about, it's agnostic to your workflow. And that does this maintaining perceptual visual quality. So it's maintaining or improving. I know Paul last time was talking about his is definitely doing that improving step. But it's improving on those perceptual quality metrics like VMAF, while balancing with fidelity metrics like PSNR and SSIM. So these types of things alongside at the back end doing things like super resolution so that you're downloading something that is taking fewer bits and then up resolution on the device itself. Both of these are saving the amount of bits that you're putting into encoding, that you're moving across the internet, and that you're storing. And I think that's a really valid use case that most people tend to say saves around 25%, but it can also save you up to much more depending on the type of content.
Okay. It sounds like, especially from listening to Paul and Maria speak, that realistically, anybody coming and saying, how can I improve my ROI? This sounds like it's obviously not an easy solution, but an easy conversation. I'm kind of also curious as to what other kinds of questions people, especially people, and Andy and Ethan first started talking about the questions their customers get, but like if we're specifically dealing with management in a company, do they first come out and say, I want to improve my ROI? Or what if some of the ways they start to actually evaluate that this might be a solution? And I throw this open to anyone, and we can get whoever jumps in first can start off this conversation.
I think when the C-suite starts to think about, hey, what are our expenses? How are we doing this? And wants to try to take a holistic view. That's where you can start to have these conversations, because across the board, when you're in sort of content operations, there are a lot of repetitive tasks that go on, encoding, quality of stream, quality of service, stuff along those lines. And you can start to plug AI in there and free people up to start to do the tasks that you hired them for, not as much of the repetitive tasks that are important and part of the process, but still require someone, at this point in time, require someone's oversight in most institutions. As you start to move down the line a little bit, you can start to see where you can pull that back a little bit, invest a little bit in removing the repetition, and start to leverage those people a little bit better.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Ethan's saying there. A lot of times it starts as cost savings conversations that are occurring. But I do feel like I see a lot of people pivoting quickly to value add and ways of earning more money effectively by having a better product or a better service or solution out there. If they can do value add differences to it, that is almost more important to them than the cost savings at the end of the day, because it becomes a differentiator.
Well, and I would add to that. So if you look at towards the end of last year, Nielsen's total audience report, one of the things that they tried to do was determine what are the factors that make a customer either stay with or leave an OTT streaming provider, right? So content being equal, which of course we know it's not, what are the factors? And of course, cost was the first. So just forget that because it's always the first. 4 of the top 10 factors that customers said would cause them to either stay with or drop an OTT provider were directly related to quality. So it's super important to cut costs, particularly now that we're out of this kind of PE subsidized golden age of television, right? Now we have to get real and make a profit, but you can't do it at the expense of video quality, because then you create ill will and you lose your customers' engagement.
That's why I like what Paul and I are talking about. I mean, there's a lot of different solutions here. But if you're looking to make money and save money, which is a primary driver for a lot of companies, and you could look at using a new codec, and that is certainly an option. It will change your workflow. The other problem is it's not necessarily available on all devices. So if H.264 AVC is very popular, it's on all the devices, but it's less efficient than H.264 or AV1. And we're seeing trends towards doing more with AV1. But you've got to also think about all the issues around costs, around moving to new codecs, licensing around that, device availability, depending on your client set. And so there's a lot of considerations. And that's why it's interesting to see the range of innovation. I'm barely scratching the surface, but there's such a range of innovation in this space.
Okay. Now, in fact, this is one of the things that interests me, at least, is that I can spend a lot of time talking with engineers, and there is always innovation going on. But then when it comes to kind of the C-suite and understanding or evaluating this technology or these innovations, that's what I'm fascinated by, because I'm worried that people will not say to themselves, I need to look at encoding solutions that are encompassing AI, because that's not their knowledge base. So I'm sure that the people who are speaking to you know about this, but what questions should people at least be circulating within their companies to make sure that their senior management become more educated about this? Because the quality thing, definitely an issue, right? Even kind of understanding what Nielsen is saying about why people churn, but to get to the nuts and bolts, really, how do you kind of elevate this conversation within your organization? Especially, I mean, I'm sure, Andy, you've had extensive experience with this, and I promise you we'll get to the questions in a second, because I see they're flooding into our Q&A. But what kinds of questions should people who are, at least even the engineers, what should they be talking about to their senior management that they will understand more than you're going to improve? I mean, the cost improvement's one thing, but are there other things, which I'll leave this as an open-ended question, that people should be floating up to the top of their companies?
I think it starts with scale more than anything else. And
Mhm.
everyone's in the market today, and there's sort of no end to the production of content and the consumption of content. But it's how do you scale your content to be the first choice that someone makes? So if you're sitting at home, you put on your Apple TV or your Roku or something like that, you have a series of apps, and you just, which one am I going to now? Right? Unless you have a specific destination when you start, I'm going to go to the one that gave me the best experience the last time I was there. And that's my starting point. And that's what I want it to be if I were running one of these companies. And so being able to scale and look ahead. I'm a hockey guy, so I love to quote Wayne Gretzky whenever possible: skate to where the puck is going, because that's how you're going to score. And that's the winning formula, I think.
Okay. Anyone else want to continue on this topic?
So I think if I'm a CFO, the question I'm asking is, how does this impact my capital and operating costs, not just today, but in the future? What does this do to our horizon of investment, right? Because let's be honest, even if you're in an engineering-led organization, the finance group makes the decisions, right? And so you need to really get in front of that and demonstrate to them how this impacts the horizon of their expense in a positive way.
Okay.
And-
And I love that idea that you actually need to kind of get your finance people kind of up to speed on this. And so that's why I'm probably going to continue hammering this is what else should people be talking about to their finance teams? The scale is absolutely relevant. The ROI, are there other things? Andy, you're kind of, I know, deeply involved in this.
Yeah, I feel like it comes down to what are the long-term costs of ownership of it, because AI is changing so rapidly that the compute cycles may change radically in a year around it. The models you're using may be outmoded and need replacement or updating or retraining. And they want to know what's the real cost of ownership? Like, great, it costs this to get it up and running. What is it going to look like 2 years from now?
Okay, so if we're talking real cost of ownership, what are the kinds of things we should be thinking about then? You just mentioned a few of them. Models? Just break it down again for me, just so I have a list.
The models, the compute power it takes to run it, in the whether it takes reserved instances or whether it's something where there's a lot of availability. I think capacity and availability becomes a big one when you're talking to the cloud, because so many people are spinning things up rapidly that it can cause it could cause issues. It often goes back to the data and the quality of the data, not necessarily what I referred to at the beginning of what you're doing with the data, but like what is the real quality of the data that I have that's driving this, because that's also going to impact the quality and the effectiveness of the AI that's going in or that's coming out of the other side of it.
Yeah.
Hey, Andy, for folks who are concerned with ESG, like how would you comment on kind of the I don't know, the Moore's law effect that we're going to see with respect to power consumption going forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I feel like the models and the workloads are getting rapidly more efficient, but I do think we're going to hit a plateau where the efficiency is gonna level out for a period of time until we radically change the way that we do compute. And there are people working on that. There are people at Microsoft actively working on things like quantum computing, and we're certainly not the only ones. But it's going to play a major role as it becomes more standardized in how we think about this type work going forward. But I mean, even in just the last 2 years, which has been the really intense generative AI boom that we've been in, I've watched the cost of running like analysis on video just drop. What was a sort of like a $20 per hour effort maybe 2 years ago, using the same technology today is pennies or dollars in comparison to it. So it's, I think we went through a period where every 3 to 6 months the price halved for what it costs to sort of process the same video and get the same quality results out of it. And I suspect we're still going to see that for a bit longer, but we're getting close to a plateau. We've probably got another year before we really hit it, and then it's likely going to take compute changes for how we think about it, or model changes.
And yeah,
Sure.
we're using smaller specialized models, which are then,
Right.
costing less. And so there are going to continue to be some innovations. And then the other point I was going to raise was with when you said about quality, if you want to get into a fast channel, for instance, and you have a lot of historical SD archive, there is going to be a quality impact. You can do some up resolution. And I talked to a lot of companies that's what they're doing to get the fast channel and to start monetizing there. So there's, a lot of people don't even realize that they're using AI in some of these things. It's just been there for so many years, all the content aware encoding and things like that. People aren't thinking that that's AI.
Right.
Maria, I want you to
Great
actually
point.
give us a little more detail on this. So what happened? So realistically, you have a company wants to put a fast channel together. Why is this important to them?
Well, if they want to put together a fast channel to monetize their historical content, for instance, and to get that out to people, and then to potentially get them onto maybe another ad-based or subscription service, by sort of doing that upsell path. This is useful if they've got a lot of content and they have those rights, but they want to make it a better quality experience, again, to what Paul was talking about.
Yeah, and the really simple answer there is that, I mean, just look at what a fast channel is: free, ad supported, right? So it's a departure from the traditional dual revenue model where you have subscriber revenue and advertising revenue. Now you just have the advertising revenue, and so cost is of utmost concern.
I'm trying to figure out how to match some of the questions that are coming in with what we're talking about. Let me flip back just for a second to the ESG. We had a question, and I'll read part of it from Indira Klein, which says, would you provide thoughts, insights regarding potential carbon emissions and the balancing act? So is there anything else that anyone wants to kind of add to this, just so I can try to capture some of the questions that people have coming in?
That was actually kind of why I asked Andy that earlier
Mhm.
question. It's kind of floating that one early.
And that's
Any-
part of what we were talking about like reducing and focusing models and things like
Mhm.
that. There are steps that we're taking to reduce those costs and emissions.
Now, is that realistically, a lot of this, what we are talking about is something that is a technology. It strikes me as it's more of a technology company that's going to be enacting some of this than a media company. So the customers, okay, maybe Paul's disagreeing, but
I'm not disagreeing at all. I would ask Evan to reiterate that the two are one and the same at this point, right?
Okay. They're one and the same, but I find that there's different companies have different levels of engineering resources available. So, some of what when we're talking about, for instance, when we start talking about using new codecs, this is something that, I know that everybody will eventually want to get to the newer codecs. I know that also from some of my previous experience that some of the people who are in the research side of things are very quick to want to jump onto some things, but then you need to actually kind of, again, same thing with talking up to the management about the financial implications. You need to also kind of circulate why something will actually work better than what you've got, so that you're not going to exactly break your existing workflow. I'm not supposed to sit here and spout things. I'm supposed to actually try to help us moderate the question. So, okay, let's hit one more before we go back to some of the questions that we've actually already planned out. We have Eric Walsh says, low-hanging fruit used for AI are improving user experience via personalization and content discovery. What can AI do to increase session engagement? So while we are talking about AI and encoding, this is still also very relevant for people. Is this something that anybody here can speak to?
I think in a lot of ways, what Paul said at the very beginning, where video quality is a magic metric, is really true in this case. You can build this great mousetrap, but if you're not delivering, then you're not going to get anybody to come in and stick around. If you're delivering a quality experience and you're using that first party data, maybe marrying it with like some second party data as well, you know, either retail or weather or something like that to really drive engagement and make one click be 3 clicks, you're ahead of the game. But it starts with the quality of what you're delivering to them. It's not about the data necessarily and making recommendations. It's about, hey, am I having a good experience in watching this?
Okay.
Yeah, one thing I would add to that, Ethan, is, so there was an explosion of content when we went user generated, right? There's a non-zero chance that we get into an era of AI generated content. And what I don't mean like having an AI like created movie. What I mean is, imagine how you can augment the metadata associated with a video asset if you apply an AI engine to the keyframes in that in that video. Now you can do things like AI generated audio description, augmenting the metadata file with, here are the actors, here's what's happening in the scene. Here's a way to search for anything that contains a red Ford pickup truck, this sort of thing. And then all the use cases that come out of that, not only in personalization, increased engagement with the user interface, but also in, advertising and relevancy and all that good stuff, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Nadine, this is an area you and I talked about in May with Fremantle
Right.
at Streaming Media around using AI to create interactive engagement
Mhm.
pieces within the content you're watching, whether it was fast delivered or streamed or otherwise. And so I think there's a lot of that going on, and Paul did a great job of sort of summarizing some of the elements that go into that. It's sort of about, I think it's sort of about using the AI to drive and anticipate the user experience outside of the content. If you can sort of anticipate the things that they're going to be Googling for or searching, or maybe using their phone to look at while they're also watching the show, you can help keep them targeted and engaged longer.
I'm actually talking about this tomorrow
There's
at
a
8,
question.
and there's a whole bunch of stuff. So there's audio content recognition to trigger ads that are related, but also being aware of contextual advertising, for instance. So doing object and people recognition, but you don't want to have a car ad if you've just seen a car crash in what you're watching. There's some fun stuff around hyper personalization where you can get translation, but also to say your name, but with lip sync, for instance. So there's so many different pieces here that we can start using. Once you remember that AI is not just generative AI, there's the machine learning and deep learning aspects of this, which enable so many other pieces.
Now, it's interesting because we had a technical question come in, which I'm going to kind of send us to next. But when we started to talk about AI new codecs, is there a specific question, Maria, that we should be asking to make sure that we support things like what you've just mentioned, like the audio support, or
I'm not exactly sure.
ad matching? Meaning, is every codec going to work this way? Is this something that's exclusive to one specific codec, or is it going to work across your knowledge of the codecs that are right now?
Yeah,
newer to the market.
These are some more of the codec agnostic discussions.
Mhm.
So, if you want to use audio content recognition, you're just listening to that audio, you're identifying the words, you're doing natural language processing, you're doing some semantic analysis around the contextual advertising, and then you're able to place that into the ad stream. But it depends on what, there are a variety of different technologies that are built to be able to handle this, but these are the capabilities that are possible. And within HPB TV, the two that I just mentioned on real-time audio for the audio content recognition and the contextual advertising, those are both live, right?
Okay.
So these are things that are being done now.
And HBTV is more in the European market, from my knowledge. How about on the ATSC3 side? It's similar?
These are general things that you can do with, say, machine learning or
Okay.
something, right? So you can then use them with other delivery mechanisms, right? So, similarly, if you want to then scrape your audio or scrape your content so you can tag it so that you can then monetize your archive,
Mhm.
right? Care what codec you've used necessarily, as long as it can interpret some of that information that's coming through. So, but
Okay, so it sounds like we've moved past, this is not a Kodak specific.
right, there are different pieces of software, let Andy talk.
Okay, let me hit the question that I said we'd talk about, and Andy,
Right.
if you can incorporate this. So Chris Corbana says, I see the discussion is focused on codecs. Are there any, from the best of your knowledge, are there any AI solutions to improve delivery and transport over congested mobile networks, or about upscaling on the player side? And Andy, you started to talk kind of a little bit about the ABR kind of prep and how you can use Gen AI, but have we given you enough information to start to let you run with this topic?
Sure, I think so. So there are certainly some scenarios, I think less around portable devices like phones or iPads or tablets, more around set-top boxes, of doing some on-device upscaling and upresing in real time, where you can effectively sort of mitigate the amount of data you're having to send, but still getting a pretty great quality experience out the other side. I think those are generally right now still a little edge casey in the way that they're being approached, because they're a little too device specific. I think the bigger value cost in those network congested areas is applying the AI more from a networking level of being able to do better packet routing, being able to do things like analyzing and helping discard unused bits that are going to help alleviate. So in other words, if you've got like a very complex ABR ladder, when we all started encoding way back in the day, we were all creating way too many versions of the same asset. And we now have the technology and the ability to identify which ones are really redundant and unuseful in a couple of different ways. Ones that are, there are visual indicators that can be used to help discard ones that are too close and too alike. And then there's network sort of delivery paths that can help you reduce the total amount of versions that you're creating, just based on what it's experiencing. And this is not really AI. This is really more of an ML thing of just being able to look and identify what's not being used, get rid of what's not being used.
Yeah. And like client side is very interesting and has its applications for sure. But when I think about scale, and going back to, I think the question that you had asked, Nadine, like what should you be asking your vendors in this regard? Like, I think about, table stakes for this should be, is it agnostic to my entire video data plane? Is it agnostic to the codecs and the formats? Is it agnostic to my transcode platform, my storage, my CDN? Is it agnostic to the clients that I have deployed, so that I don't have to worry about stranded capital from a client perspective, right? And so that really, in order to get to real scale here quickly, I think that the technologies that we employ have to operate independently of the balance of the ecosystem.
Okay.
And I think, not to go too far down a rabbit hole on this, some of this change is happening on the because driven by the OEMs and the hardware side of things, because there's more ubiquity across the platforms now than there was even 15, 20 years ago. You remember the early days of mobile, everyone had a different video codec to use. Everyone had a different language to use to write an application. A lot of that has been smoothed out by the market. So you're sort of targeting a little bit easier in terms of, hey, what's this technology decision we have to make, and where are we going to sort of reap a benefit from it? And you don't have to support as many codecs anymore because those single codecs will work ubiquitously.
I mean, is this something that we should just expect every vendor to support now?
Soon.
Soon, okay. And somebody else asked the question, and we also discussed this on our planning call about kind of mobile and consumer support. So it's easy enough for us to talk about using, you know, using existing technologies that incorporate AI, incorporate quality of experience metrics, being able to kind of fine tune what we've got. But is this something that will work across the board on everything, or will older devices have a hard time with this?
I would go back to my prior point, which is to the extent that you can implement this in a way that provides all the benefits and at the same time remains agnostic to the balance of your platform, the only changes that you should have to make to your video data plane should be in capacity decisions in going forward, right? I'm not going to need as much CDN going forward. I'm not going to need as much storage going forward. I'm not going to need to invest as much in low latency initiatives because the packets are smaller, right?
And then if you think about emerging platforms like AR, VR, where the experience is so different than sitting back and watching television, but the expectation is I'm going to watch Gone with the Wind in an AR setting and be able to turn my head and see the entire screen all the way around me, right? That's an encoding question based on a platform. It's not really related to anything other than meeting the demand of that market.
Maria, were you going to say something else?
I was just going to say it depends, you know, what you're trying to achieve and which technologies you're using. You know, like I said before, if you're using newer codecs are going to be more restricted on what devices you're using them on. If you're using AI within your infrastructure, then as Paul says, you know, what you're then looking at is you've reduced your bits, so you're going to be using less storage, right? While maintaining that perceptual visual quality. Okay. So really, you know, what your objective is really impacts what the outcome is.
You know, to my mind, I still think that you have people using a number of vendors, say in the encoding space, and is everyone at the same point? I guess one of my questions is are there questions we should be asking these vendors specifically to make sure that they're supporting what it is that you're going to need or what you're going to expect from this technology?
I think I would start with ubiquity to what I have now and how are you going to help me grow? Those are the two big questions that I would ask. And then the next one, almost right behind it, almost 2B, would be, hey, how is this going to fit into my existing workflow? Because what I don't want to do is disrupt what we're doing today. I want to be able to grow what we're doing today.
And there's also safety and security issues. You know, is my content still safe? You know, I have intellectual property. You know, I have deals with studios. I have deals with rights holders. So that's another key piece to understand.
Yeah, I would also be cautious as you consider combining this with or expecting this to be part of an encoding platform. You know, I kind of look at that as kind of so I've been a cable guy my whole life, right? I feel like the cable industry made a mistake when we combined the cable modem with the Wi-Fi radio because one has a decidedly different lifespan than the other, right? And that was a bad choice. I feel like, you know, the technologies that we're talking about today have benefits outside of and well beyond just encoding. And so I would really look with a very critical eye at transcoders and encoders that incorporate this, because then I would ask, okay, well, you know, how do those roadmaps converge and or conflict with each other? am I really getting the full benefit across the entire platform?
Now, obviously, this panel is called Cutting Streaming Delivery Costs with AI, but we are focusing quite a bit on encoding. Is there any other topics that we have not hit that you guys think are very important to talk about before I ask my next question?
I think Ethan called out a little earlier, reducing costs through automation of part of that workflow as well. And that's outside of the encoding tool chain itself. It could be things like just automating the subtitling or the captioning, or I think I saw one of the questions around sort of automating localization of it into other languages. And all of that can be cost-saving factors on this as well. It can also improve delivery times. Speed to market is pretty critical when you're talking about video, particularly if it's live video, of course.
Okay.
Another thing is, delivery, right? So we're moving out of this old kind of archaic mode where we have a handful of public CDNs that terminate at the edge of a huge ISP, and then there's a unicast connection between that ISP's customers and the edge network. There are really interesting ways that we can use AI to get a lot more intelligent about routing all the way down to the customer and a lot closer to the customer, that not only improves the quality of the experience for the end user, but also can significantly reduce the amount of capital that ISPs are going to have to invest in augmenting their networks, so that when 80% of video viewership is happening OTT versus where it's at today, which is over QAM and satellite, right? As that 80-20 shifts in the other direction, you shouldn't have to make an investment in your network that is linear to that shift. You should be a lot smarter about that.
And the digital production partnership came up with like a nice list of all this, and I'll just run off a few that nobody else has mentioned. So the for versioning, for like doing verticalization, so switching from horizontal to a mobile device. We did talk about localization. I would say to somebody who asked about that, Paper Cup is a great company doing that sort of dubbing piece. But they're also using a human in the loop, right? So that it's a large majority of that automation, but we still are maintaining augmentation by having that human in the loop for quality, especially for premium content. You could automate scheduling for fast channels, for instance. And another one that one of the studios said, this is a big one, is just rights and royalties, because you often have a lot of different deals in place. And you may want to sort of analyze and summarize those contracts, especially if there's a lot of differences across that. So there are many, many use cases along this whole fulfillment side.
Now, in fact, one of the things that a couple of people have spoken to me about for another article was making sure that once you have some use cases like what you've mentioned, that there's a QA kind of component involved, the human in the loop. So what are the kinds of questions people should ask? We might need to kind of look at generic questions, but realistically, how do we make sure that what is being, created using AI, ML, generative AI, how do we make sure that it's accurate? How do we make sure that, especially, on the encoding side, on the transcription, et cetera, what are the kinds of questions people should be thinking about just to make sure that they are being effective? Especially because we had a question earlier that Andy answered about ROI. He answered it privately, so I was going to go there next. But I first want to make sure that people have an idea that they should be thinking of questions.
But you cut out a little bit.
So you have somebody doing a project, right? Sorry, you have someone doing a project. What are some of the QA types of questions you should be asking, or the human in the loop questions?
I think it's, where are you comfortable putting that human in the loop, and how, what does the feedback look like from that human? So is the human only sitting at the end in the final checkpoint? Is the human sitting in the middle and can send something back to the beginning of the process? And I think that changes the person you're going to have sitting in that chair as well, and probably the value of the person who's sitting in that chair at some level. But I think you have to sort of think through, what your comfort level is and how deep you're willing to trust the AI engine versus that human in the loop.
Yeah, so quality and opportunity.
Okay.
So Paper Cup, they did tests with Jamie Oliver, and they showed that by using AI dubbing versus subtitling, he got 28 times more views for his Spanish content.
Mhm.
So that was able to then gain him a much higher reach, for instance. And that was again with the human in the loop, but it was, you know, AI dubbing with human in the loop. Now, some of these things may just be automated, and if you're just doing something and you're just trying to get reach and mostly accurate is good enough, that's another thing. But if you have a premium content brand, then you probably still want your human in the loop, but you can do so much more with that AI dubbing.
Let me move on to the ROI question, just because I think Andy answered this privately, but let me ask the question. It says, would you elaborate on ROI timeframe, especially when in early stages of integration? So we were talking about this in the beginning, and we were talking about incorporating AI into your encoding process, your transcoding, making sure that your quality is superior. But if you have if you're thinking about how can I prove this out, what kind of time frame are we looking at in terms of your ROI?
It depends on if it's CapEx or OpEx, right? So CapEx, you got a horizon. You know, the ROI is in deferring either end of life replacements or future investments as demand grows. OpEx, however, has an immediate ROI, right? So if you can, you know, cut your CDN costs by a third tomorrow, boom, there's a huge improvement right there. We have a customer where we're deploying this. They are still a direct satellite broadcaster, so that kind of like DirecTV, the old DirecTV and Dish model. This is in Europe, however, and you know, a transponder costs them millions of dollars per year in OpEx. If we can cut a third of their transponder space, immediate ROI. They can simply just tear down and remux those channels much more in a much more dense fashion onto fewer transponders and cut that cost out of their business immediately.
Okay. Anybody else on the ROI?
I think a lot of it depends on what the organization is trying to accomplish by implementing AI. And, you know, that's always an important question when you're sort of at that starting point around AI. So what were the goals? Because if it's a consolidation play, right, that's pretty straightforward. If it's, hey, we want to expand user experience and drive more revenue, increase subscriptions, then your ROI is going to have a longer horizon to, because it's not going to have that immediate impact that Paul was talking about. Yeah, you can cut CDN costs and easily, you know, cut some costs quickly. But if you're looking to grow on the business side on the consumer side around ad placements, subscriptions, and stuff like that, you have to give yourself that time to then implement the change, let people notice the change, and then build on top of that.
So ballpark, give me some numbers, some ranges.
I think you should see some changes if you implement properly, you know, and Andy probably has a better handle on this than I do just because of where he sits. I would think in the 18-month horizon, you should start to see something sort of make a change in what you're doing.
Yeah, that's about the number that I was gonna say out loud for that. But totally agree that you can get shorter cycles on the ROI on cost saving elements in particular, rapid to implement, but those sort of growing the business ones, it takes time, and often there's course correction that has to go in as part of it, and that could drag it out even longer.
Okay. Anybody else want to wrap that topic up before we move on to the next thing? Okay, the next question is actually pretty broad, and it was, you know, because you all are from different areas, I'm wondering, are there questions that you have for each other? Are there things that you're thinking about that, you know, you'd like the opinion of another person? So it's a question that's very open. We initially, this panel was specifically more on encoding and generative AI and AI. So I've tried to stick to that, which is why, unfortunately, some of the questions that are coming in, I have not been able to answer because they're a little bit outside of the scope of this panel. But the questions that you guys would have for each other, what kinds of things are you thinking about?
I've got one. So measurement of quality.
Mhm.
So if you look at the old like MOS scores, right? That stood for mean opinion score. Originally, it was people filling out surveys and what did they think about the quality of audio, video, whatever. Now we've moved on to much more advanced methods like VMAF that compares an output to the source that it uses, right? And on a scale of 0 to 100, what percent of quality did you accomplish? With AI, there's a non-zero chance. In fact, I'd say there's a 100% chance that the video that a consumer watches could actually end up being higher quality than the source that the broadcaster used. In which case, VMAF is scoring that. It's like scoring the A student's test against a C student's paper, right? So I'm wondering how AI could be used to put the opinion back into MOS scoring and effectively simulate what a human actually would say if we had a panel of humans watching TV and scoring it.
Well, I think, Paul, I think you have to ask, like, do you want that opinion back in? Do you want, someone to give it the eye test versus looking at it analytically? And is that important, that eye test as well? Because there's advanced stats for everything, right? And they tell a story, but then you could watch something and tell a completely different story with it. So I think it's a little bit of both. Would be where I would want to land out. Hey, does this look right to us? And can we back the fact that it looks right?
I just feel like opinion can be a leading indicator of churn, and churn is one of those things that's really hard to measure, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Any other comments from this, or should we move on to the next thing? I'm seeing smiles. Okay. How about, do other people have questions for each other? I mean, I know that, one of the things, Andy, that I often think about is if I'm sitting here and I'm trying to identify what has been done in terms of the kind of AI pipeline with encoding, especially, how can I personally tell the difference unless somebody's telling me something? Meaning, can I visually see it? No.
Right.
Don't I have to have some measurement form of other measurement?
Well, I think, I mean, it sort of comes down to exactly what Paul was talking about. It sort of becomes your opinion at the end of the day on whether that was a good quality or not, regardless of the analytics. And that's going to change from viewer to viewer. It's going to be almost from device to device with the same viewer as well, as you're consuming across multiple different types of devices. I guess the problem with that is, and this is like an age-old encoding problem, is when encoding is doing its job, you just forget and you're just consuming content and engrossed in the story or the sport or the other element of it, and that is sort of the perfect answer on encoding's role in this is to kind of be invisible to the process.
Yeah, I was a golden eye, which is what they call a human observer on this. For when I was CTO of a Disney Sony JV called Filmflex Movies. And I was changing everything per version, and we were trying to reduce bits, but also maintain quality. And we were also trying to give it sort of more flexibility. This is way back, right? Sort of, 2007 time frame, 2008. And, you can do a lot of these things now with these analyses tests. And it certainly, you'll need to do a lot more at scale, but I looked at a lot of different things. And I had a list of sort of things that I was looking for. So you can automate that kind of thing.
Somebody brings up a question here. Beth Rosen said, what if there are requirements for no upscaling of content? Is the automatic AI upscaling going to cause a problem? Would you be able
The only time I've seen
say something is automatically upscaled? So you were the golden eye. You actually.
Sorry, I keep losing you, Nadine. The only time I've ever heard about a real problem with
I know.
was when it was used in a legal case, and their concern was is that they had generated new parts of that image, right? I haven't heard of any problems other than people wanting to get higher quality and not getting it. You know, that they would like
Cost factors in upscaling, particularly if you have like a lot of SD content. I think you'd mentioned that one earlier. And you're looking to take it to 4K, there can be a big surprise on the cost factor and just of storing that amount of additional bits. And also sometimes with the content that you're upscaling, the original quality is just so low that there may be times when going all the way to 4K doesn't make sense with the content, and that becomes part of the value judgment or the trade-off that a human has to make to a certain degree. Is it worth it?
I would say two things here. So number one, what I think I'm reading between the lines on the question is, are there contractual risks as it relates to upscaling? And so I would say, with regard to that, yes, there are content providers that will demand that the distributors of content not change the resolution. There are quality improvements and there are cost savings that can be accomplished without changing the resolution. Now, to the extent that you want to upscale the resolution, I think that AI represents a spectacular opportunity for doing so in a really nice way, because the typical upscale involves things like pixel doubling, right? Where you just kind of take and just double the pixel that was right next to it. You know, with AI, generative AI, you don't double the pixel. You generate what would have been in that pixel if it didn't need to be doubled, right? And so you get a much better experience. And then of course you have to make sure that you're training your model not to create weird hallucinations and all kinds of stuff like that. But that's easy-ish.
I'm afraid we're out of time. We have a lot of questions that have come in. I'm glad to see everyone's very interested in this topic. We'll have to continue it again. And I want to thank everyone who spent time on the panel as well as the audience. And thank you very much. And I'll hand this back to Evan.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Nadine. Thanks, panelists. And again, yes, thanks for the audience. Big audience sticking around, being engaged, adding questions. It's really great to see. It's a real good sense of community here. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you. Great content once again. To our winner, congratulations, Jim O'Brien, correctly naming The Dude by Donald Byrd. Having nothing to do with Big Lebowski, right? I don't know. I don't know enough about music to participate in these contests, to be honest with you. I want to thank our sponsor yet again, Vecima Networks, for making this panel possible. And we're going to have another panel, or a fireside chat, more accurately, in about a half an hour time at 1 p.m. It's a conversation between Steve and the folks from Cloudinary, which is a very cool name. Alan McClellan, who will moderate actually and talk to the folks there. So actually, I apologize. That's Cloudinary at 1 p.m. with Steve Nathans-Kelly. Thanks so much for sticking around. I'll see you in a half an hour.
Thank you.
Thank you.